This is Best HFY Stories Humanity. Fuck yeah.
Kyle Morrison had grown accustomed to the silence of the service quarters. It was the kind of silence that wasn't truly silent at all, but filled with the soft mechanical hum of life support machinery, the endless sigh of air recyclers, the metallic creak of starship bones expanding and contracting under pressure. After 3 years of pushing his cleaning cart up and down these arteries of the ascendant, he could almost map every note in this metallic symphony. Each sound was a reminder that he lived inside a machine, not a world. And like the machine, he too had become invisible. At 53, Kyle's joints protested each step. Every shift of his knees reminded him of the gravity that had once been Earth's, now nothing more than a ghost, lodged in his bones. He had survived the collapse of his planet, the chaos of evacuation, the humiliation of being labeled one of the useless remnants. From scientist and leader of agricultural preservation initiatives to janitor sweeping alien floors, that was the trajectory of his fall. And in the eyes of the Zakal Empire, he was no more significant than the dust motes he swept into his pan. Yet invisibility had its advantages. No one noticed the janitor. They walked past him as though he were part of the walls. Guards in gleaming armor ignored his presence. Nobles never even turned their heads. Even the surveillance drones that tracked every breath of commoners seemed to filter him out as background noise. It was a strange power being beneath notice. And sometimes in the emptiness of his nights, Kyle wondered if being unseen was preferable to being despised. That night, though, invisibility would not protect him. The clang of the maintenance hatch closing behind him rang too loudly, echoing down the corridor like a warning shot. He winced, his hands tightening around the handle of his cart. He had learned to keep his movements measured, quiet, to never draw unnecessary attention. Yet sound had a way of betraying you in these hollow chambers. He froze, breath shallow, listening. At first only the steady pulse of machines answered him. Then so soft he thought it must be a trick of memory, he heard it, a child's sob. Kyle's heart clenched as though a phantom hand had gripped it. He closed his eyes, trying to shut out the sound, but it came again, raw and helpless. He hadn't heard a child cry in years. Not since Earth. Not since the day he'd buried. He stopped himself, shaking the thought away. The past was a pit best avoided. The sobs came from up ahead, where the corridor widened into one of the observation lounges. Kyle knew that section well reserved for the elite, a place where commoners had no right to linger. He should turn around, keep moving, sweep the other way, stay invisible. But his feet betrayed him. They moved forward step by step, as if pulled by invisible threads woven from memories he had long since tried to bury. The corridor ended in a curve of transparent aluminum, a viewport that looked into the lounge. Kyle pressed his back to the bulkhead, peering carefully through the edge. There in the cavernous chamber sat a girl. Small, fragile, dwarfed by the polished floor and the towering windows that displayed the cold beauty of the stars. Her skin was blue-green, the mark of Zakal royalty, though in the harsh light it seemed pale, almost gray. A holographic projector flickered in her lap, struggling to sustain the image of a perfect red apple. The illusion shimmered, stuttered, broke apart into static. Each time it failed, the girl flinched, her small fingers brushing against nothingness. Her shoulders shook silently, her sobs dampened into the still air. 8 years old, Kyle realized. Just a child weeping over a fruit she had never tasted, a memory she had never inherited. It hit him like a blow, an apple. Something so common, so taken for granted in the orchards of Earth. Something he had once bred and grafted with scientific precision, fighting to preserve biodiversity before the world fell apart. And here among the stars, a princess wept because she had never touched the real thing. Pathetic. The voice cut like a blade. Kyle stiffened. From the far side of the lounge, a tall figure entered, moving with predatory grace. Her presence seemed to drain warmth from the room. Queen Moirana, the Empress of the Zakal. Her skin was the same hue as her daughter's, but richer, deeper, like ocean water at twilight. Her eyes were pure white, pupilless, as though they saw everything and nothing at once. Leah scrambled to her feet, wiping frantically at her tears. Your Majesty, crying over a hologram. Moirana's voice was colder than the void outside the windows. Is this what my heir has become? a mewling child weeping over shadows. I'm sorry, Mother Eye. Just what Moirana advanced her robes, whispering against the floor. Just forgot that we are Zakal, that we rule through strength, not sentiment. She gestured sharply at the flickering apple. This weakness destroyed the humans. They clung to their memories, their useless emotions, while their world burned around them. Kyle's fist clenched so hard his knuckles whitened. His chest burned with rage, though he dared not breathe too loudly. Moirana's voice carried no trace of maternal concern as she called for guards. Two figures emerged from the shadows, their armor gleaming under the artificial lights. They flanked the girl, preparing to escort her away. Leah looked up at her mother one last time. Her eyes, dark and wet, flickered with a desperate spark of hope. But Moirana had already turned away, dismissing her. As the entourage passed, Leah's gaze drifted across the lounge, across the cold partition, and landed directly on Kyle. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met. He had no words for what passed between them. Recognition. A plea, or simply the desperate need for someone, anyone, to see her, not as a symbol, not as an heir, but as a child. Then she was gone. Kyle remained in the shadows, heart hammering the echo of her sobs lodged in his chest. His cart sat forgotten behind him. Ahead, beyond a sealed door, lay the forbidden heart of the ship, the Royal Arboretum. And within it, something more dangerous than any weapon, a fragment of Earth. He had spent 3 years living as dust. Tonight, a child's tears would force him to remember that even dust could carry seeds. Seeds that could grow. Seeds that could burn. The Royal Arboretum of the Ascendant was not meant for common eyes. Certainly not for a janitor with a faded uniform and calloused hands. It was a sanctuary, a cathedral of green, hidden at the heart of the ship, a place where even high nobles required permission to enter. Yet the door stood before Kyle, now humming with its electronic lock, an almost mocking invitation. He had no plan, no strategy, only an ache in his chest that had started with a child's tears and grown unbearable with every step. He shouldn't be here. If he was discovered, punishment would be swift and final. But still he placed his palm against the panel, heart pounding. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Light spilled out and Kyle staggered as if struck. For a moment he couldn't breathe. His lungs, used to the sterile, recycled air of the corridors, rebelled at the sudden flood of scents, earth damp moss, living chlorophyll. The air was heavy, intoxicating, rich with the perfumes of things that grew rather than things that endured. He stepped inside his boots, sinking slightly into soil that looked impossibly dark and alive. The dome overhead projected a sky of blue and drifting white clouds so real his eyes watered. Rows of plants stretched in ordered lines, herbs, flowers, alien shrubs with translucent leaves shimmering like glass. All were Zakal, in origin specimens, carefully preserved from their homeworld. But Kyle's gaze found the anomaly instantly. At the center of the arboretum stood a tree unlike any of the others. It was small by Earth's standards, perhaps 8 feet tall, its bark rough and brown, its branches spreading in graceful arcs. Green leaves whispered in the artificial breeze. And from one of its branches, hanging at perfect eye level, was a single apple. The sight pierced him more deeply than any blade could have. He had seen countless apples in his lifetime orchards, stretching for acres, genetic varieties cataloged and preserved in vaults. Yet this one alone among the alien foliage seemed more sacred than all the others combined. It was not just fruit, it was memory. It was the weight of everything lost. Kyle approached as though walking toward an altar. His hand trembled when he reached out. Fingers brushed smooth skin warm from the simulated sunlight. It was solid, real, impossibly real. His throat closed. Tears stung his eyes. He hadn't wept in years, but now they came unbidden. The crunch of footsteps shattered the moment. I should have known. The voice was soft, calm, yet carried the inevitability of a death sentence. Kyle spun around the apple still clutched in his fist. Queen Moirana stood in the doorway. She was no longer in her ceremonial robes. Instead, she wore plain garments of dark fabric, but this simplicity only heightened her presence. She seemed larger here among the plants, her pale white eyes luminous against the greenery. Her gaze dropped to the fruit in Kyle's hand, then slid to his face. then lowered to the faded tattoo visible on his wrist where his sleeve had slipped back. Dr. Kyle Morrison, she said. Each syllable fell like a stone into still water. Botanist, former head of Earth's Agricultural Preservation Initiative, survivor of the final evacuation wave. Kyle's stomach turned to ice. Moirana stepped closer, silent on the soil. Did you think I wouldn't know who you were? Did you think I would not remember the man who helped destroy my husband? Her words landed like blows. Kyle's voice cracked when he forced it out. Your husband, Commander Thaniel. Her jaw tightened. He was the liaison to your alliance. He died on your pathetic world, believing your promises that Earth could be saved. Her eyes flashed. He died because of you. Kyle staggered under the accusation. Memories surged, the desperate effort to stabilize the atmosphere processors, the evacuation of research outposts, the chaotic final hours when systems failed. I remember Commander Thaniel. He was a good man. He was a fool, Moirana hissed. A fool who died for human sentiment. She circled him like a predator, her robes brushing the foliage, her movements deliberate and predatory. This tree was his final gift to me, a cutting from your precious earth orchards preserved as a memorial to his misguided compassion. I kept it to remind myself why emotions are weakness, why hope kills. Kyle looked down at the apple in his hand, its red skin glowing faintly in the artificial light. For a moment, he saw it not as fruit, but as gravestone, a symbol of love turned to loss. You saw her today, didn't you? Moirana's voice sharpened, crying over illusions, exactly the kind of pathetic display I will not tolerate in my heir. Kyle's temper flared. She's 8 years old. She should be allowed to feel what pain loss, the agony of hope destroyed. For the first time, her voice cracked, a fracture in her icy composure. Feelings nearly destroyed me. I will not let them destroy her. Kyle met her gaze, something hot and reckless rising inside him. Maybe destruction isn't always the worst thing. Maybe sometimes you have to break before you can grow stronger. The Queen's lips tightened, philosophical platitudes from a species that went extinct. She raised her wrist, calm, security to the Royal Arboretum, immediate. Within seconds, armored guards stormed through the entrance, weapons gleaming. They fanned out, encircling Kyle. Moirana's gaze never left him. Execute him, she said quietly. The apple slipped from his fingers. The cell was smaller than a coffin, its walls of bare metal sweating condensation. A single flickering light panel hummed overhead. Kyle lay on the cold floor, staring at the ceiling, time dissolving into meaningless stretches. Hours, days, it didn't matter. He replayed the Arboretum again and again. The taste of real air, the sight of the apple, the weight of Moirana's accusations. And Leah's eyes filled with tears meeting his across the glass. That image clung to him even as he wondered whether he had ever opened his own eyes outside this cell again. Footsteps echoed, sharp, military, a hiss of hydraulics. The door slid open. 6 guards entered, flanking him. One word move. They marched him through quarters he'd never seen, deeper into the ship's heart. The path led upward into vaulted chambers until at last the doors parted and revealed the throne room. Kyle gasped despite himself. It was vast, carved from obsidian-like stone, lit by shafts of cold white light. Pillars rose like monoliths supporting a ceiling that seemed impossibly high. At the far end, raised upon a black dais, was the judgment throne, and on it sat Queen Moirana. She wore formal robes of deep purple that swallowed the light, a simple circlet of dark metal upon her brow. Her stillness radiated absolute authority. To her right stood Princess Leah. She was dressed in a smaller version of her mother's robes, her expression carefully composed into the neutrality of royalty. But her eyes betrayed her. They flicked constantly toward a pedestal placed between the prisoner and the throne. Upon that pedestal sat the apple Kyle had stolen. Under the harsh lights, it glowed like forbidden fire. The guards forced him to his knees. The chamber was filled with courtiers, nobles, officers of the empire. Their gazes pressed down on him like weights. Dr. Kyle Morrison. Moirana's voice echoed, amplified by hidden speakers. You stand accused of violating the sacred Arboretum, theft of royal property, and attempted corruption of the heir to the Zakal Empire. How do you answer these charges? Kyle lifted his head, meeting her eyes, then the child's. Leah's composure wavered, her lips pressing together as if to hold back words. Guilty, Kyle said clearly. A ripple of shock passed through the court. Murmurs stirred. Moirana's expression did not change. You do not seek mercy. Kyle shook his head. Your daughter already knows pain. I saw her crying over a hologram because she has never known anything real. You think you are protecting her, but you're only teaching her that life isn't worth living. Gasps echoed. Moirana's fingers tightened on the armrest. Kyle nodded toward the apple. If sentiment is weakness, if emotion is death, then why preserve that tree? Why keep the one thing aboard this ship that has no purpose but to remind you of what you've lost? For the first time, Queen Moirana hesitated. Kyle pressed on. You kept it because your husband loved it, because it was real, because you know deep down that life without beauty, without wonder, without hope isn't life at all. The silence that followed was so sharp it seemed to cut. Moirana's hand hovered near the ceremonial blade at her side. Her eyes burned with memory and fury. She rose slowly, descending the steps of the dais. When she reached Kyle, she knelt so their faces were level. Her voice was quiet, dangerous. You want to know what I see when I look at you, Cumin? I see the face of everyone who failed my husband. Everyone who promised salvation and delivered death. Kyle swallowed, his voice barely more than a whisper. And I see someone so afraid of losing what she loves that she's forgotten how to love at all. The blade shifted in her grip. Mother. The word rang like a bell through the chamber. Princess Leia had stepped forward, small and trembling yet impossibly brave. Every gaze turned toward her. Mother, may I speak? The queen's hand froze. The trial was about to take a turn none of them had expected. The throne room of the Ascendant was designed to intimidate, and it succeeded. Every surface was black stone or gleaming metal, polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting cold light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Obsidian pillars lined the hall like silent executioners, and the throne itself, raised high upon its dais, was more monument than chair. To stand accused here was to stand beneath the full weight of Zakal history, the centuries of conquest and dominion that had elevated their empire across the stars. And to stand accused as a human, a relic of a dead world, was to be reminded that one's life had as much value as ash scattered on the void. Kyle knelt at the base of the dais, wrists bound, his knees grinding against the cold floor. His body ached, but he refused to bow his head. He forced himself to meet the queen's gaze as her amplified voice rang through the hall. Dr. Kyle Morrison, Moirana intoned, her white eyes luminous in the half-light. You stand accused of violating the sanctity of the Royal Arboretum, theft of sovereign property, and attempted corruption of the heir to the Zakal Empire. The words echoed off the walls, magnified until they seemed to come from the ship itself. How do you answer these charges? The court was silent, expectant. Nobles leaned forward, eager for spectacle. Guards stood motionless, weapons gleaming. And to Moirana's right, Princess Leia watched with wide eyes, her hands clenched together as though holding back a flood of words. Kyle drew a slow breath. The apple sat on its pedestal halfway between him and the throne, glowing softly in the artificial light. It was absurd, he thought, that something so simple, so fragile, could carry the weight of life and death. Guilty, he said. A ripple moved through the court like a gust of wind through dry grass. Murmurs broke out, sharp and incredulous. A few nobles laughed quietly. Others exchanged glances that spoke of contempt. Moirana's expression did not flicker. You do not seek mercy. Kyle shook his head. Your daughter already knows pain. I saw her crying over a hologram because she's never touched something real. You think you're protecting her by surrounding her with shadows. But all you're teaching her is that life isn't worth living. Gasp rang out. It was as though the janitor had slapped the queen across the face. Guards shifted uneasily. Moirana's fingers curled against the armrest of her throne. You dare. Kyle pressed on, his voice firm. If sentiment is weakness, if emotion is death, then why preserve that tree? Why keep the one thing on the ship that serves no purpose except to remind you of what you've lost? For the first time, Moirana hesitated. Just a heartbeat, but the silence in its wake was thunderous. You kept it because your husband loved it, Kyle said, seizing the opening. Because it was beautiful. Because it meant something beyond survival. You kept it because you know deep down that a life without beauty, without hope, isn't a life at all. The court fell into dead stillness. Moirana rose from her throne. Each step down the dais was measured deliberate, the ceremonial blade at her side glinting as her hand brushed against it. She descended until she stood face to face with Kyle, her presence pressing down like gravity. "You want to know what I see when I look at you, human," she said softly, though her words carried to every corner of the chamber. "I see the face of everyone who failed my husband. Everyone who promised salvation and delivered death." Kyle's throat tightened, but he did not look away. "And I see someone so afraid of losing what she loves that she's forgotten how to love at all." Her hand closed around the hilt of her blade. The chamber held its breath. "Mother," the word cracked through the air like lightning. Every eye turned to the small figure standing beside the throne. Princess Leia had stepped forward, her robes too large for her slight frame, her chin trembling as she lifted it high. She looked impossibly small against the towering pillars, but her voice carried with startling clarity. "Mother, may I speak?" Moirana froze her blade half drawn. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. Then curtly she nodded. "Speak." Leah's voice wavered at first, but as she continued, it grew steadier, stronger. "I had a dream last night. I dreamed I walked through a garden full of apple trees, just like in the stories Father used to tell me. The sun was warm on my face, and I could smell flowers and birds were singing in the branches. And I was happy, Mother, happier than I have ever been in real life." Moirana's face became a mask, utterly still. "Dreams are not real, daughter. But feelings are real." Leah countered, her small voice suddenly sharp. "The happiness I felt in that dream was real. And so is the sadness I feel every day when I wake up and remember that gardens like that don't exist anymore." She glanced down at the apple on the pedestal, her eyes shimmering. "When I saw this today, I felt something I've never felt before." She swallowed. "Hope." "Hope is dangerous," Moirana whispered, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "More dangerous than despair." Leah's voice rose. "Because that is what I live with every day, Mother. Despair, the certainty that nothing will ever be beautiful or wonderful or worth caring about. Is that really the future you want for me?" The court was transfixed. Nobles who had come to see a spectacle of condemnation now leaned forward in rapt silence, hanging on the words of a child. Kyle's chest swelled with something like awe. The girl had found the one argument that could pierce her mother's armor. "The universe is cruel," Moirana said after a long pause, her tone faltering. "It will break your heart if you let it." "Then let it break!" Leah cried, her eyes blazing. "Let it break and heal and break again, because at least that means I'm alive. At least that means I'm feeling something other than this emptiness." Her words rang through the chamber like a song of rebellion. For a long moment, no one moved. Even Moirana seemed caught between two tides, the icy fortress she had built around her heart, and the warmth of the child she had tried to shield from it. Then before any answer could be spoken, the silence was shattered. An alarm wailed, piercing and shrill echoing through the throne room. Red lights flashed along the walls. Officers scrambled, their composure breaking at the sudden intrusion. The intercom crackled. "Medical emergency on Deck 7. All available personnel report immediately. Victims collapsing. Condition spreading." The voice cut off as another alarm joined the first. Then another. And another. Until the entire ship screamed in electronic distress. Moirana turned sharply to the comm console. "Report." A frazzled officer appeared on the screen. "Your Majesty, we have a crisis. Crew across multiple decks are losing will to live. Their skin is turning gray. They're fading. Current count over 200 and rising." Gasps swept the court. The nobles muttered in fear. But Kyle's eyes went to Leah and froze. The princess was swaying, her hands trembling as the color drained from her blue-green skin, leaving it pale gray, lifeless. Leah Moirana's voice cracked for the first time, filled with raw panic. The girl collapsed against the pedestal, her small body trembling. "Mother," she whispered, her voice weak. "I don't feel very well." Moirana caught her in her arms, cradling her, as if she were made of glass. And Kyle, staring at the fading child, understood with icy certainty the fate of the Zakal was bound not to strength, but to the very thing they had denied. Life itself. The throne room had dissolved into chaos. Courtiers scrambled robes, whipping in the flashing red lights. Guards shouted into comm units, their metallic voices carrying fragments of panic. Officers hurried back and forth, each bringing more dire reports than the last. But Kyle saw only one thing, the small, fragile body in the Queen's arms, her skin losing its color by the heartbeat. Leah's breath came shallow, ragged, her lips trembling, as though each word was a war. "Get me the chief medical officer," Morana barked. The comm screen flickered again, and the lined face of Dr. Vex appeared. Even through the static, his own blue-green skin had a sickly tint, gray, spreading along his neck like smoke under the skin. "Your Majesty," he said hoarsely, "the condition appears to be genetic. Our people are losing their connection to life itself, as if our very essence is becoming unstable. We cannot stop it. Already hundreds are collapsing." Morana's voice cracked, though she forced it into steel. "Find a solution. Now." Vex's eyes dropped. "I don't know if there is one." "No," the Queen's shout cut through the chamber like thunder. Her composure, once an unbreakable glacier, was shattering under the weight of her daughter's weakness. "You will not fail me. You will not fail her." Kyle stepped forward before the guards could stop him. "Dr. Vex, what would happen if the victims were exposed to a living ecosystem? Real soil plants, microorganisms, not sterile chambers but chaos. The way life is supposed to be." The doctor blinked, taken aback. "Theoretically, exposure to a biodiverse environment might trigger a stabilizing response. But we don't have such an ecosystem aboard the Ascendant." "Yes, we do," Kyle said urgently. His mind was racing, fueled by the sight of Leah's fading form. "The arboretum, the soil there isn't synthetic, it's real earth soil. And the plant's living, breathing systems. It's exactly what you need." Every eye in the chamber turned to him. Morana's gaze snapped like a blade. "You expect me to entrust my daughter to the hands of the man I just sentenced to death?" Kyle didn't flinch. He looked down at Leah, her tiny fingers curled limply against her mother's sleeve. Her breathing was faltering. "Because she deserves better than this," he said softly. "Better than the emptiness you have given her. Better than the despair you called strength." Morana's white eyes bored into him, searching for deception. What she found instead was desperation that mirrored her own. Finally, she snapped to the guards, "Release him." The command rippled like shock through the chamber. But Majesty, one officer began. "Do it!" Morana's voice was raw, fraying with fear. The bonds around Kyle's wrists were torn free. He staggered to his feet, rubbing at the red marks left behind. "Escort us to the Arboretum," the Queen commanded. "All speed." The journey through the ship, it was like descending into a nightmare. The corridors of the Ascendant had always felt sterile, but now they felt like tombs. Everywhere Kyle looked, Zakal citizens lay crumpled on the ground, their skin graying, their eyes hollow. Medical personnel moved frantically among them, trying stimulants, transfusions, artificial respirators. None of it worked. The despair in their faces was worse than the illness itself. Whispers filled the air. "The end has come. The bloodline is collapsing. The empire is dying." Leah whimpered weakly against her mother's chest. Each sound spurred Morana to a faster pace, her long strides eating the distance with desperate urgency. Kyle kept at her side, heart hammering, praying that he wasn't too late. At last, the sealed wooden doors of the Royal Arboretum loomed before them. Security codes were punched in locks, disengaged, and the barrier swung open. The flood of green hit Kyle again, and this time it nearly dropped him to his knees. The sense, the warmth, the sheer vitality of the place, it was salvation waiting to be grasped. Morana laid her daughter gently on a bed of moss near the apple tree, then turned to Kyle with eyes blazing. "Do something." Kyle knelt beside Leah, pressing fingers to her wrist. Her pulse fluttered like a bird trapped against glass. Too weak, too shallow. He dug his hands into the soil at the base of the apple tree. It was alive, yes, but too clean, too carefully maintained. "This won't be enough," he muttered. "Life isn't sterile, it's chaotic, messy, interconnected." He looked up at the Queen. "I need organic waste, decomposing matter, bacteria, anything to see diversity." "The ship's systems sterilize everything," Morana said tightly. "Then we make our own." Kyle stripped off his gloves, pressing his bare hands deep into the soil. Blood, sweat, skin cells, anything alive. It's crude, but life doesn't care about purity. It cares about connection. Morana recoiled. That's barbaric. That's life, Kyle shot back. Your Majesty, I need you to help me. Get your hands dirty, share yourself with the soil, give your daughter something real to cling to. Her face twisted with revulsion. I am Zakal royalty. I do not. You are a mother, Kyle interrupted fiercely, and your daughter is dying. For a heartbeat, he thought she would refuse. Then Leah's body spasmed, a weak pain sound escaping her lips. The fortress around Morana's heart cracked. Wordlessly, she dropped to her knees beside him and plunged her pale hands into the soil. Kyle felt it instantly, the subtle chemical exchanges, the microbiological sparks of life connecting. His blood, her skin cells, the living earth mixing into something richer, more dynamic. It's working, he whispered. The soil's responding. They worked together in silence, hands moving through the dirt like desperate priests at a sacred ritual. Morana's robes became smeared, her fingers stained, but she didn't care. She was no longer queen, she was only a mother clawing at fate. Why, she asked suddenly, her voice trembling. Why do you care? Your people and mine were enemies. Why risk yourself for a Zakal child? Kyle glanced at Leah's gray face, so still, so fragile. His throat tightened. Because she reminds me of someone I used to be. Someone I lost before I learned that caring too much can break you. Morana was quiet for a long moment. Her hands kept moving, digging, mixing. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost human. Thaniel used to say love wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about deciding some things were worth the risk of being hurt. I thought he was naive. I thought his death proved me right. But maybe, her breath caught, maybe it proved that loss is the price of love, and love is still worth it. Leah stirred faintly, her eyelids fluttering. Kyle and Morana froze staring. Her breathing hitched, still shallow, but perhaps, just perhaps, a fraction stronger. Kyle's gaze darted to the apple resting nearby, forgotten in the crisis. It wasn't just fruit. It was a vessel, a genetic blueprint of Earth's ecosystems, an evolutionary trigger encoded in flesh and seed. The apple, Kyle said urgently. She needs to eat it. Morana looked at him as if he had gone mad. What? It's a biological key, he insisted. It's enzymes, it's genetic markers. They're echoes of the living systems we've been cut off from. Her body will recognize it, remember it. It might be enough to wake her cells, to remind them how to live. He lifted the fruit, its red skin glowing in the dome's warm light, and held it out. Your Majesty, the choice is yours. If we do nothing, she dies. If this fails, then blame me. But if it worked, for the first time, Kyle saw it in her eyes, hope. Fragile, terrible, radiant hope. Morana's hands trembled as she took the apple. She lifted Leah's head gently, cradling her daughter against her lap. Then she bit into the fruit herself, chewing, softening the pulp, before pressing it to the child's lips. Leah's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, dazed. She swallowed weakly. Seconds passed, then minutes. The alarms outside the arboretum wailed on, but inside time seemed suspended. Slowly, so slowly, color began to seep back into the child's cheeks. Not gray, not the pallor of fading, but the vibrant blue-green of her bloodline tinged with something brighter, warmer, alive. Her breathing deepened. Her small hand rose, curling weakly around her mother's finger. Mother, she whispered, her voice steadier than before. I feel different. Kyle exhaled, shuddering. His heart thudded in relief. But then the air around them seemed to shift. The soil pulsed. Leaves turned toward the girl as though she radiated sunlight. Roots extended, quivering, reaching for her. And where Leah's feet touched, the moss flowers began to bloom. The arboretum vibrated with an energy no machine had ever produced. Kyle felt it in his skin, in the soil beneath his fingers, in the very air pressing against his lungs. The plants were no longer passive. They were listening. Princess Leah sat upright in her mother's lap, her breaths deeper, steadier. The gray pallor had vanished, replaced by a vibrant blue-green glow that seemed to shine from within. But it was more than healing. Her eyes, once pure white like her mother's, now shimmered with flecks of green and gold like sunlight filtering through leaves. I can feel them, she whispered in awe. All of them, the roots, the leaves, the tiny things in the soil. They're singing. As she spoke, vines along the walls quivered. Flowers turned their faces toward her. Even the great apple tree seemed to pulse with new growth, buds bursting into blossoms that showered pale petals down like falling snow. Kyle's heart pounded. This wasn't mere recovery. This was change. Evolution blooming before his eyes. Moirana stared, torn between wonder and dread. What's happening to her? Evolution, Kyle breathed. The apple didn't just heal her. It woke something that was already inside her. Before the queen could answer, the doors to the arboretum slammed open. Commander Zarek strode in, flanked by armored soldiers. His face was flushed with exertion, but his eyes glittered with something sharper suspicion and fear. Your Majesty, he said, his voice clipped, we've traced the source of the anomaly to this chamber. Reports indicate unusual activity. His gaze swept the transformed greenery, the blossoms swirling in the air, the living soil underfoot. Finally, his eyes locked on Leah, who now radiated vitality like a second sun. What exactly has happened here, he demanded. Moirana rose to her feet, standing protectively in front of her daughter. The princess has been healed. Zarek's jaw tightened. Healed or contaminated? The soldiers behind him shifted uneasily. Some tightened their grips on their weapons. Others couldn't look away from the miraculous sight of flowers blooming where the child's bare feet touched the ground. Kyle stepped forward, unable to hold back. This isn't contamination, it's awakening. Your people have been starving for connection, cut off from life itself. She's showing you what was lost. Silence, human. Zarek's voice snapped like a whip. He turned back to the queen. Majesty, the condition afflicting our people is genetic, rooted in centuries of careful bloodline control. If the princess has changed, she may no longer be Zakal. She may be something else entirely. Something dangerous. Dangerous, Moirana repeated, her tone icy. Yes, Zarek pressed. His hand drifted toward the weapon at his side. Our survival depends on purity, on strength. If this awakening spreads, it could mean the end of us. We must contain it immediately. Quarantine the princess. Eliminate the human. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Guards shifted uncertain. Moirana's white eyes blazed. Commander, you dare to speak of eliminating my daughter. Zarek straightened, unyielding. Your Majesty, forgive me, but your judgment is compromised. You've been too close to the contamination. For the good of the Empire, I must assume command. He lifted his weapon. Stop! Leah's voice rang out, impossibly strong for one so small. Every plant in the arboretum reacted. Vines whipped across the floor, lashing around soldiers' ankles. Branches swung down like clubs, knocking weapons from armored hands. The very air grew thick with pollen, making intruders cough and choke. Zarek stumbled, fury blazing in his eyes. Abomination, he roared, struggling against the vines that coiled around his arms. No, Leah said, her voice clear and steady. She stood now, small but radiant, the glow of life shimmering around her. This is what we were meant to be. Not sterile, not broken, alive. One of the younger soldiers, pale with the early stages of the gray, fading, stared at her with wide eyes. He dropped his weapon, whispering, "It's beautiful." Zarek snarled, "It's corruption, human corruption. If this spreads, we lose everything that makes us Zakal." Kyle stepped forward, fire in his voice. "You've already lost everything that made you alive. This isn't corruption, it's salvation." The young soldier took a step toward the apple tree. His hands trembled as he reached for one of the new fruits hanging heavy on its branches. "Don't you dare!" Zarek bellowed. But the soldier ignored him. He bit into the apple juice running down his chin. The change was instant. Color rushed back into his face. His eyes lit with a vitality he had never known. He dropped to his knees, weeping with relief. "I can feel it," he whispered. "I'm whole again." One by one, other soldiers followed, casting aside weapons to seize the fruit. Each who ate was transformed skin glowing with renewed color, eyes brightening with flecks of green and gold. The arboretum itself seemed to rejoice, plants swelling with new vigor as if sharing in the rebirth. Zarek raged, straining against the vines. "Fools, you're damning yourselves. You're becoming something alien." No more, Rana said, her voice ringing with royal authority. She stepped to stand beside her daughter, her stained hands proof of her own transformation. "They are becoming what we were always meant to be. connected, alive. She turned her white-green eyes on Zarek, cold and commanding. Commander Zarek, you are relieved of duty. Soldiers who continue to follow his orders will be charged with treason against the royal family. For a heartbeat, the chamber was taut with tension. Soldiers glanced at one another, caught between fear and awe. Then the young soldier who had first eaten the fruit stood tall, color blazing in his cheeks. I will follow the queen, he declared. Others echoed him. One by one, they turned their backs on Zarek. The commander's face twisted with fury. You're all lost. The Zakal Empire dies with you. No, Leah said softly, yet her words carried like thunder. The Zakal Empire is reborn with us. At her gesture, the vines tightened, dragging Zarek to his knees. His weapon clattered from his grasp. Majesty, you cannot, he choked. Morarana looked down at him, her expression hard as stone. I will not kill you, Commander, but you will be confined, isolated in the sterile world you worship so dearly. If you cannot accept life, then you may rot without it. She turned her back on him, dismissing him utterly. Kyle stared at her astonished. This was not the same queen who had ordered his execution. Her authority was unchanged, but it was tempered now by something new. Something Leah had awakened in her as surely as the apple had awakened her daughter. The arboretum pulsed with life vines, swaying blossoms, unfurling as though celebrating the victory. Soldiers moved among the trees, their hands brushing leaves, their eyes shining with newfound wonder. Leah turned to Kyle, her small hand reaching for his. You gave us this, she said softly. Kyle shook his head overwhelmed. No, you gave it to yourself. I just reminded you how. The child smiled, and for a moment Kyle glimpsed not just the girl she was, but the woman she might one day become, a leader who could heal an empire. Around them, the ship still wailed with alarms, thousands still succumbing to the gray fading. But here in this sanctuary, a seed had been planted. A rebellion not of swords or ships, but of soil and roots. And it was only the beginning. The alarm still echoed faintly in the distance, but inside the arboretum, the sound was drowned beneath something greater, the hum of life. It was not mechanical, not sterile. It was the pulse of roots, spreading leaves, unfurling, flowers blooming where no flower had ever been. The soldiers who had eaten from the apple tree moved like men reborn. They touched the soil reverently, their eyes alight with flecks of green gold, their once strained faces filled with vitality. For the first time in generations, they felt connected not to orders or hierarchy, but to life itself. Queen Morarana stood among them, her royal robes smeared with dirt, her pale hands stained by soil. She no longer looked like the untouchable empress of cold authority. She looked like a woman who had fought for her child and found herself changed in the process. Her eyes, still mostly white, now shimmered faintly with green at the edges, like cracks of sunlight breaking through ice. Kyle watched in awe. The woman who had once sentenced him to death now stood at his side, sharing in the miracle he had helped bring to life. But the crisis was not yet over. Beyond these walls, the Ascendant was still a ship full of fading bodies, thousands collapsing in despair. Kyle turned to the Queen. It can't stop here. If we keep this contained, too many will die. We need to spread it, every corridor, every room. Morarana's gaze lingered on her daughter, who still stood glowing near the apple tree, her presence coaxing flowers to bloom at her feet. Then she nodded firmly. Then we begin now. They left the arboretum with Leah at their center, her small form flanked by transformed soldiers who radiated new strength. The corridors that had been tombs moments before began to stir with wonder as they passed. Zakal citizens lifted their gray faces to see a child glowing with vitality, surrounded by vines that reached through bulkheads, leaves unfurling from cracks in the walls. Is it real? One whispered. Leah paused, crouching to press her hand to the metal floor. Roots burst forth, curling around her fingers, bringing with them a surge of green that spread outward like wildfire. Flowers bloomed along the corridor, and the gray-skinned citizens gasped as color returned to their flesh, as if her touch reminded their cells of what they had forgotten. The miracle spread faster than the despair. Kyle worked beside soldiers and medics, teaching them how to distribute the fruit of the apple tree, how to mix soil with sweat and blood to seed life in sterile compartments. Every person who ate from the fruit carried the change within them, becoming a living spark that awakened life wherever they walked. Deck by deck, the sterile perfection of the Ascendant gave way to gardens. Storage bays became groves. Corridors sprouted vines that wove around support beams. Quarters blossomed into meadows filled with the scents of herbs and flowers. The endless hum of machinery was now joined by bird song, tiny creatures Leah seemed to summon from seeds embedded in the apple's genetic memory. The Ascendant was no longer just a ship, it was becoming a world. Not everyone accepted the change. Zarek and his most loyal followers were confined in the untouched, sterile sectors. They raged against the contamination, insisting it would destroy the Empire. But their voices grew weaker with each passing day, drowned by the joy of those who had been healed. Moirana herself confronted Zarek one final time. She stood outside the sealed bulkhead, her voice carrying through the calm. "You speak of purity, Commander, but purity is nothing more than loneliness sharpened into a blade. If you will not join us, then you may keep your sterile prison. But know this, you are the last relic of a dying age." Zarek spat back defiance, but Kyle saw the truth his world had already ended. Weeks passed. The transformation of the Ascendant continued until every deck thrummed with life. The medical crisis vanished as if it had never been. Children laughed in corridors that had once been silent. Soldiers who had once marched with mechanical precision now tended gardens with patient hands. Kyle found himself at the heart of it all, guiding, teaching, planting. His expertise, once dismissed as irrelevant, was now invaluable. He was no longer invisible. He was the gardener of an empire reborn. And yet he never forgot the child who had started it. Leah had grown stronger every day. The glow in her eyes deepened. Her voice carried harmonics that resonated through walls. Her connection to the living systems expanded until she could coax entire decks into bloom with a gesture. She was more than princess now. She was symbol, prophet, living proof that hope was stronger than despair. Kyle sometimes wondered if she was still a child or if she was already something far greater. One evening, as Kyle knelt planting saplings in a repurposed hangar bay, Moirana approached. She no longer wore robes of authority. Instead, she dressed as any worker did, sleeves rolled, hands smudged with earth. Yet when she stood there, she radiated more authority than ever before. Not the brittle power of fear, but the enduring strength of one who had chosen love. "Dr. Morrison," she said quietly. He rose, brushing dirt from his hands. "Your Majesty." Her lips curved faintly. "You saved my daughter's life. You saved all our lives. There is no measure for that debt." "I didn't do it alone," Kyle replied. He gestured toward the gardens where Zakal and humans worked side by side, laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. "We all did this." "No," she said firmly. "You chose compassion even when you had every reason to hate us. That choice changed everything." She drew a steadying breath, then spoke words that stole his. "I have a proposal. I want you to stand beside me, not as servant, not as outsider, but as partner, as prince consort, as guardian of this new world we're building." Kyle stared stunned. The woman who had once condemned him now offered him her throne. "Your Majesty, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified." "You're qualified by your heart," came a smaller voice. Leah appeared beside her mother, her glowing eyes fixed on him. "By your willingness to care for people who gave you no reason to. That's the kind of strength we need." Kyle looked from mother to daughter, and for the first time since Earth had died, he felt a future stretching out before him. Not sterile survival, but living, breathing possibility. "Yes," he said at last, his voice quiet but steady. "I'll help you build this new world." Moirana's smile was small but genuine, the first he had ever seen from her. She extended her hand. Kyle took it, feeling the warmth of her skin, the tremor of uncertainty hidden beneath. Then Leah placed her small hand on top of theirs. Where three hands touched, a flower bloomed from the soil, a bloom unlike any other, not Zakal, not human, but something new. They stared at it, and Kyle felt tears sting his eyes. "To new beginnings," Moirana whispered. "To growth," Kyle said. "To life," Leah added, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the gardens, making every leaf tremble in answer. Around them, the Ascendant hummed not with sterile machinery, but with the symphony of a billion growing things. It was not paradise, not yet. There would still be conflict, still those who resisted, but it was alive. And as Kyle stood between queen and princess, he felt something he had thought forever lost: certainty. The certainty that tomorrow would be better than today, And the day after, better still, the seeds they had planted together would grow into something magnificent.